Did you know that grass makes up nearly 26% of the plant life on Earth? And in the United States, there's roughly 1,400 species of grass. From your front lawn to the pasture that serves as a food source for livestock, it takes a lot of work to find out the right grass seed for your farm or home. On this episode, we catch up with Steve Salisbury from Oregon. Steve is one of the nation's foremost grass seed researchers, and he shares some valuable insight on grass seed production and the research that goes into producing grass and forage in North America. Plus, Jody Lawrence dives into the recent corn rally and how the transition of power in Syria has already impacted oil prices. Stay tuned for this episode of FieldLink. This episode of FieldLink is brought to you by research. Did you know that research is a powerful tool to help you produce more grass yield and better total digestible nutrients for your forage crop? Contact your Helena representative to learn more. Energize your soil and elevate your crop. And welcome back to FieldLink. I'm your host, Bill Smith, and joining us today from Oregon is Steve Salisbury. Steve is a researcher in the grass production seed area in Oregon. And Steve, welcome to FieldLink.
Thanks, Bill. Glad to be here. This is awesome.
Awesome. Well, Steve, you do a tremendous amount of research in seed, and we're going to talk about seed today for grasses, for forages, cover crops, as well as all of the grass in our front lawn. But before we go there, let's talk a little bit about Steve. Steve, how did you get involved? Where's home? Where'd you go to school? How did you become an expert in this area?
Well, I don't know if I'd call myself an expert. You know what they say, you got to be 500 miles from home in order to be considered an expert. So I'll leave that one alone. But I was born and raised right here in the Willamette Valley. I actually grew up working on a grass seed farm through high school and through college. And so it's kind of that's what you did here in the Willamette Valley. If you grew up here, you were either moving pipe for row crop growers or you were on a grass seed farm, most likely. So as a country kid. So yeah, I grew up here, graduated from a small university north end of the Willamette Valley, and then went to graduate school at Oregon State University and got a degree there, and kind of been in ag ever since, and had a little stint out of state, went to Idaho for a few years, and then came back to Oregon, and then I've been here ever since, and have the great opportunity of working with the grass seed growers here in the state of Oregon. So it's kind of my background, I guess, a little bit.
Well, Steve, you're certainly in a very unique area, and I think a lot of our listeners, grass is everywhere, forages are everywhere, cover crops are, throughout all over North America and beyond. But a lot of that seed and a lot of the research that goes into it has grown really in one really condensed area, and you happen to be in it. Tell us a little bit about geography.
We're very proud of the fact we're still considered the grass seed capital of the world. There is state of Oregon. There is over 300,000 acres of grasses grown for seed in the state. Most of those which reside here in the Willamette Valley. We do have some production of Kentucky bluegrass and some pine fescues, and starting to be more tall fescue and printing ryegrass grown on the east side of the Cascades. We kind of split our state kind of east and west of the Cascades, different growing conditions altogether when you get east of the mountains, but they're very good grass seed growers over there as well. And so it's, a lot of grass seed production here and so forth.
Why is Oregon such a great location for seed production for grass?
Well, I think it has something to do with we're 50 miles away from 50 to 70, depending on where you're at, but you're about an hour away from one of the world's largest insulators of weather with the Pacific Ocean. So I think that you come over the Coast Range and you drop into this beautiful valley here. We have some amazing soils, very dark organic soils. They're mineral, but with a really good level of organic matter. The climate is wonderful because of where we're located. We don't have hard winters. We don't have blazing hot, dry summers. We have that middle of the road. So our cool season grasses that we grow just really thrive. They love this climate where you got a lot of rainfall. We got roughly, I think we average about 48 to 50 inches of rain a year. And most of it all comes obviously in the wintertime, starting right now from October Through about May, it's pretty dang wet. It's a lot of fog and a lot of rain and a lot of water, and it's the grass loves it. It's very cool, and but it's temperate. It's not freezing. We'll get cold, but not like other parts of the country. And it's when you live this close to the ocean like that, that's where you. Yeah, we'll get snow occasionally, and we get freezing, but we don't get that deep hard freeze that a lot of other places in the country get. Yet we don't get the blazing hot desert heat like the Southwest does. So it's a great area, great soils. Weather patterns are wonderful. It lines up for our harvest very well. I mean, the Mother Nature kind of shuts the rain off there about mid June-ish, and then we can harvest our grass. We're dry pretty much July, August, in the first part of September, which allows for a great harvest. And then we get back after it again in October. So
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about I guess, the cycle, if you will, for seed production. When do you plant seed? Walk us through that process through, as you mentioned, harvest and it sounded
yeah,
like July, September, that sort of thing.
yeah. So there's we in that regardless, if we think about our grass for seed here, we have perennial grasses and we have annual grasses. And the big annual grass is annual ryegrass. It's a big producer. We have well over 100,000 acres of annual ryegrass every year in the valley. That gets planted every year. Traditionally, it gets planted September, October. There are majority of the acres. There are some acres that like the no-till acres. They a lot of times will wait a little bit longer. So you might see plantings in November. I've even seen some annual ryegrass, if it's a diploid annual ryegrass, get planted after the first of the year and still able to kind of squeak out a crop. But for the most part, the majority of our crop is planted right here in the fall, in the September, October range. The perennial grasses, perennial grasses being your perennial ryegrass, tall fescues, fine fescues, Kentucky bluegrass, and the bent grasses. Those things get planted either springtime, so you have spring plantings that generally won't produce a seed crop that first year, or you'll do a fall planting, and we're getting pretty good where we can fall plant and we'll get a pretty good crop that first year in most cases. So it kind of just depends on the grower's rotation. If his rotational crops are such that maybe it works better to plant in the fall, or maybe we kind of winter fallow it and then plant it in the spring. It's either way. Options work. So balancing out the soil type and your rotations and those sorts of things. So yeah, about that's when we plant it.
Well, Steve, there's certainly a lot of unique production in your area there from talking about that life cycle, so to speak. So, what are some of the challenges that seed producers, growers in your market face in growing seed production?
Weed production or weed control is a big one. We it is continually it's just an ongoing challenge when it comes. We have a lot of IPM issues, and we'll talk
Mhm.
about a few of them, but I'll start with weeds. So if you can imagine growing a grass seed crop, and your biggest weed issue are grass
Sure.
weeds. So how do you control those is a big deal, right? And if we start talking about herbicides and chemical control, we've become pretty proficient at being able to control grass weeds out of our grass crop, which sometimes to the person on the outside looking in, they think we're nuts. I mean, we're putting herbicides on grass that is a grass killer, but yet we figured out a way to make it work within our system, so we're not killing our crop. Some are a little harder than others. We'll compromise your crop a little bit, but we can clean it up. So that's always a challenge. And I think more and more growers, and on top of herbicides, we realize that there's got to be another piece to this than just the herbicide piece, because we all know herbicide resistance is a real thing, and we need to make sure we do our part to manage so that the seed that we sell into the market is not supplying herbicide resistance
Mm.
plants
Right.
somewhere else, which is a big deal, and we take that very seriously. So guys have worked very hard at like crop rotations, trying to break that chain of chemical dependency, and working in rotational crops that will help control those weeds, where we can use different chemistries somewhere else in the rotation to we prevent that kind of buildup and development of resistance. So that's part of the game, trying to figure it out. Planting timings. I talked about majority of those annual crops, and even some of our perennials are planted September, October, early November. Well, if we can wait a little longer, you can get a better kill, and you take care of that early sprout and plant your crop, you're clean. If you wait until the spring, a spring plant, it's because you might be able to clean up that spring flush of volunteer sprout that might show up. So it's definitely a balancing act in the world of weed control. And we're up against annual bluegrass, and rough stock bluegrass is a big problem for us, and trying to control that. And it's just, we have a few others too that we're always dealing with. But that's when I always talk about weed control. Grass weeds is our number. It's easy to kill a broadleaf and
Right.
a grass crop. I mean, right? I mean, American ag has got so many options to do that, but it's like, all right, now we're literally taking a herbicide now that's a grass killer, putting it on our grass crop, knowing that it's going to compromise that, but we really need that pristine, clean crop, and that's what we're shooting for. And like, so that's a challenge. The other one that the people kind of laugh at, that if they're not familiar with grass seed production, is
Really?
slugs. Believe it or not, I mean, slugs will they'll completely devastate an entire crop if you don't keep them in check. It is incredible. You think about a little gray garden slug that's about that big, and they're by the millions. They can just go across your field and just gone. It is absurd, and the amount of damage that can occur from a slug. I did a study, kind of an economic study, if you will, for the Oregon Seed Council here a few years ago, trying to put some dollar figures to how big is this issue. And what the Sea Council was asking for is they wanted some information that they could take to the state legislature and try to get some funding to get to the university so OSU could hire a slug expert, basically. And I just did some very conservative math, looking at the amount of damage, the amount of cost to control, those sorts of things. I mean, you're talking every year. This is $100 million issue. I mean, this is a big deal. I mean, we're always constantly battling the slugs. Right now, I mean, is a the soil moisture is finally starting to come up a little bit. And I was just out in my fields the other day and looking at my plots, and I got slugs working already. And it's like, oh my word! So here
Right,
we go.
right.
You gotta you gotta get after slug control. So
So what are some common practices for controlling slugs?
yeah, probably the most common one is metaldehyde. So metaldehyde baits, our slug baits. I think our poor suppliers in the valley here, they I think they got to order it. Well, I don't think. I know they order it by the truckloads, and it's there's a lot of metaldehyde goes out, and that's probably that. The metaldehyde. There's also some iron phosphate base that we use they're not, I don't know if you non-chemical, I guess, but they work because they're toxic to the slug, and so they'll control them. So there's a lot of those. That's
Okay.
probably the primary usage. We are funding the grass seed industry as a whole. We also fund a lot of research, and getting that new slug expert over in Corvallis on campus at OSU. I mean, he's looking at some very cool
Mhm.
biological control we're very interested in. We have another research scientist over there who's with the USDA who's looking at utilizing RNAi, which we hear about in other crops across the country, to try to introduce RNAi to help control that slug, or try to at least keep it tamped down a little bit would be huge. So there's some cool work being done, but right now our options are limited. Metaldehyde and iron phosphate baits are our number
Sure.
one usage for sure.
Steve, let's pivot a little bit about, on our opening, we talked about there's all kinds of seed out there for grasses and all kinds of usage. Tell us a little bit about, I guess, where you spend most of your time. Is it on forages or cover crops or turf for whether it's sports turf or lawn turf?
Absolutely. I would say all three segments are very important. So the turf market is a big deal, right? I mean, that's all the homeowners, all the country clubs, all of the athletic sports surfaces, professional and amateur. That's a lot of that what you see is coming from Oregon grass seed industry. In fact, I mean, it's like every year, like the
Mhm.
Super Bowl. I can't remember when it was in Glendale, Arizona, a few years ago. That's the one where they can roll the
Yeah.
turf outside and then they roll it back into the stadium. That's all Oregon
Wow.
turf. That's all Oregon grass. And I think every year that, like, wherever the Super Bowl is played at, it's like, for many years anyways, it was like, it'd be cool to highlight the fact I know the grower
Sure.
who produced the seed that those guys are playing the Super Bowl on, for crying out loud. Or you look at the Masters National. I mean, that seed is most probably likely coming from Oregon. It's very cool when you look at those professional turf market side of things, and you look at a ball field and you go, "Yep, I know where that
Right,
grass
right.
seed came from," or what have you. It's very cool. Turf industry is very important. But it doesn't stop at turf. A lot of people will think grass; they think their front yard, which great. You should definitely have a natural
Yeah.
grass front yard and reseed it very frequently. But the other markets, I'll say forages. The forage market is a big deal. So I always try to help people understand if you like milk product, dairy products, milkshakes, ice cream, whatever it might be, cheese. Um, those cows had to eat something, and a lot of what they eat is it's grass that they're it's part of their ration is grass pastures. Think about all the people across the country that have grass pastures. Those pastures are being seeded at some point and overseeded at some point to renovate that pasture. We're producing the forage seed for those pastures and for those productions for livestock to either create beef or creating milk and what have you. So the forage market's a big deal. I guess I should back up. Let me back up to the turf markets. Turf type, tall fescue are perennial ryegrasses, fine fescues, and Kentucky bluegrass and bent grass. Bent grass is what you see on the putting greens and
Mhm.
PGA tours. All those are bent grasses, and we have the bent grasses produced right here in the Willamette Valley by a small group of very cool growers who take care of that crop very well. So that's the turf market. Ryegrass, you got perennial ryegrasses, turf type talls, Kentucky bluegrass. That's probably what most homeowners are probably
Sure.
mostly familiar with. The golf folks, very familiar with the bent grass situation. When it comes to forages, we produce forage tall fescue. So, like we always hear about K31. Kentucky 31 is like the age old standby. That is your pasture grass. That is produced here in the state of Oregon. We also produce other varieties fawn fescue has been around forever. Alta fescue has been around forever. These are some very traditional tall fescues used for forages. Orchard grass seed. Orchard grass is a unique animal, and producing the seed is no small
Okay.
feat. It's a challenging crop in its own right, but we do produce the seed for the orchard grass that's used in pastures and what have you. Annual ryegrass is very utilitarian. Maybe I mean you can use that as a forage. You can use it as an overseed in the turf market. You could use it as a cover crop. So if you think about in the South and the Sun Belt,
Sure.
right, this down south, those cool season grasses go dormant, right, in the
Yep.
summertime. They're gone, or is it the wintertime? Yeah, they go dormant. I might have got that backwards, but you can overseed that because it's warm enough in that sun belt that annual ryegrass will keep your greens and your fairways green, and then it's gone, and then the perennial grasses come back and take over again. So, like if you're using zoysia grass or some of these other warm season grasses, Bermuda grass, those sorts of things, they will go dormant. That's where the annual
Mm.
ryegrass, that's the application. They can apply the annual ryegrass. It'll sprout, grow quickly. It'll keep all of your fairways, everything in your yard very green, and then it'll die out, and then the warm season grasses take over. And it's a great way for that turf industry. It's also good forage. You can graze annual ryegrass. There's a lot of annual ryegrasses, especially when you get into the tetraploid annual ryegrasses. Those are the big leafed annual ryegrasses that the livestock absolutely love. But then another market that the state of Oregon has worked very, very hard at, our Oregon producers, when I say the state of Oregon, I'm talking the Oregon grower, at
Mm.
the cover crop market. And I think there's a lot of evidence out of the Corn Belt, the Ohio's, the Iowas, the Illinois, and the Indianas, and that have shown that there is a true benefit when using annual ryegrass as a cover crop there when it comes to moisture and fragipan break and fracturing the soils and having a better soil health, better tilth, better drainage, all those sorts of things. Annual ryegrasses fits the bill there very, very well, along with other cover
Sure.
crops that are produced or we actually produce those seeds out here too, and they get utilized in that cover crop market in the Midwest. So a lot of angles for our crop and our seed, but at the end of the day, I mean everything right starts with the seed, and that's in the world of grass. It's we're that's where we're at. We're all about producing seed, not so much the biomass, the hay. I was dealing with chemical registrants that come in and we talk about certain products that might have a fit here to help us with maybe a weed or an insect or whatever. Always talk about crop injury. We don't care about like biomass. We're not here to produce biomass. We're here to produce seed. So we try to keep them very focused on the seed aspect of that, because a lot of times when you talk about grass, most people will go to just
Sure.
pasture grass or they're just thinking about feed grass, and it's like, well, that's nice, and even if you think about your turf grass and your lawn, that's nice, but it all had to come from the seed. And out here, our growers, that's what we focus on is how do we produce this seed so it's the cleanest product, the purest product. It's grown correctly, and we're providing the market with what they need. So that's kind of maybe a synopsis or a snapshot of it.
Sure. So, Steve, to the novice, I grew up in the seed business, the seed corn business, but a lot different than grass in some ways. But it takes a while to bring a variety to the marketplace. How long can you walk us through the research and the development of maybe a new variety of grass?
Yeah.
And how long does it take to bring it to the market?
That is I'm not a grass breeder, so I apologize to all of my grass breeder friends out here that might listen to this interview. But
It's okay.
the breeders, from my perspective,
Mhm.
grass breeding, varietal development is a constant, ongoing process. It just never stops. You just keep plodding along, and you got a customer who shows up and they want a grass that's tolerant to these conditions, or want a grass that can produce this, and
Sure.
those breeders are continually trying to improve upon cultivars. How many years does it take? It's a great question. I mean, I don't know a good specific answer other than to say it takes several years to produce it, and it depends what the end user is looking for. If the end user wants a rust resistant or a highly rust tolerant perennial ryegrass that has a certain shade of green that they're looking for, so they'll go to work, and then maybe it grows on a low pH soil or something, right? So they can
Mhm.
the breeders, that's their job, is to select those plants.
Right.
The interesting thing about this whole conversation is that the breeders do a very good job of that. We have some breeders in here in Oregon that they know their business, and there are grass breeders outside of Oregon. Now there's breeders at Texas A&M, there's breeders at Rutgers, there's breeders at, I mean, they're right. There's big turf programs across the country, and in a lot of ways, when it comes to the seed production, it all ends up back here, which is pretty cool. So the rub comes for the grass seed grower is, yeah, they'll generate a variety that maybe the market really likes. But when they select it for that variety, it doesn't produce seed or it produces very little.
Mm,
So now the grass seed grower, his challenge now is to take that and figure out, how do I produce as much seed as possible out of that variety? And like anything else, whether it be corn seed, as you were talking about, genetics dictates the production, the reproducibility of that plant, right? So it's going to dictate what level of seed production it's going
sure.
to kick out. So there's always a little bit of give and take or push and pull with that. But as far as how long does it take, it's several years. And there's a lot of breeders, and not just here in Oregon, like I mentioned, there's breeders, really good breeding programs across the country that are working at this all the time.
So tell us, Steve, a little bit about the research that you do there in Oregon or in this particular industry.
Sure. So when I started my kind of my program, I was actually, it's crazy to think it's about 10 years ago now, 10 and a half years ago. This is crazy. But
Wow.
so I went to work for the Oregon Seed Council, and the Oregon Seed Council is comprised of all of the members of the grass seed industry, right? And part of the council's overall program was pesticide management or pesticide development and maintenance. Years ago, this started like in the late 80s through the 90s. There was what I consider my predecessor was Dr. Ron Burr, and he's legendary. I mean, and rightfully he should be. The man did an amazing job for this grass seed industry and helping them navigate through the brand new FIFRA laws and the regulations that were being handed out by the EPA, the Oregon Department of Ag. They were had to be lockstep with them, and Ron really did a wonderful job at getting all of those existing chemistries basically in line with regulation, and he did a wonderful job of researching all of those and so forth. And he also helped develop new use patterns of new chemistries coming along that could be used for grass seed. Well, Ron retired, and the seed council several years later, they came and asked if I would be interested in developing a program of my own that would kind of help with this thing. They kind of had a void here. They didn't have the assistance that they were looking for, and I said, absolutely, because I love I basically grew into this job because I love research. I was at the time I was working, actually, I was a field agronomist for a local retailer here. I was a branch manager and what have you. So I understood the grass seed industry. I understand the chemical industry. I understood regulations, and this allowed me. But I really loved doing research, and I did research when I was in that previous role. But this now allows me. I can focus 100% of my time on doing ag research for grasses grown for seed. So I do a lot of herbicide work, a lot of herbicide screening, a lot of use pattern development stuff. I look for those things. I'm always trying to maintain good relations and communications with registrants, distributors, and whatever, and hear these kind of a nonstop brainstorming, if you will, to what are the ideas, what's floating around out there that might have a fit for us in grass seed. And then if it does, then we'll sit down and have a longer conversation about, hey, this is, I'll throw in my 2 cents. This is what I think we could do with this potentially. What do you think? And yeah, there's support there. Yeah, let's do that. So I will take treatments. I'll put them out on all of our grass types, and I'll evaluate those for performance and crop safety, and then able to turn that data back to the grower. Everything I generate is goes back to the grower. The growers, that's who I'm contracted with, is with the grower, and I love that position.
Sure.
And I work very, very hard to make sure that the industry, and I'm talking like the local suppliers as well as the distributors and the registrants, understand I'm not here to blow any one person up. I'm here to support the industry, support the grower. If somebody's got a treatment that'll work, let's talk. Let's get it done. Let's figure out
Right.
how we can get it incorporated into the system. So that's where I started here. Oh, maybe 3 years ago, 3, 4, almost 3.5 years ago. The grass seed growers came to me and asked me if I'd be interested in expanding my program to do more of what I do. I love working for these guys and gals. It's just a great industry, and so I entertained the conversation. As I was in conversation with them, I was afforded an unbelievable opportunity to actually to purchase a research farm, and so my wife and I always joke that we bought the farm. So, but it's turned out to be just an unbelievable blessing and opportunity. So now I've continued my research program, but I'm owning and operating a research farm. We put plots out. I keep an inventory of all of the grasses that Oregon grows. So I got them here, so I can do research plots here. At the same time, I've also maintained that part of my program where I go out onto growers' fields and put plots there as well, because I know I can only do so much here, but I've also got to do it on their farms as well. So it's been amazing. It's been really, this last 3 years has been, there's been a lot of learning for sure,
Sure.
but the amount of work that we've been able to accomplish is gone up, and we've been able to do more and more. It's just pretty awesome. It's been very, very cool. So
Wow, that's an awesome story there, and thanks for sharing that. So Steve, where do you see the future of seagrass production going as we look down the road?
I think the future is always bright because I think everything's going to come back to seed. I think that the turf industry is always good. I think the turf industry generally will follow the economy in the United States.
Mhm.
So as the economy will slow, you'll see less people will want to buy that bag of seed at Home Depot or Lowe's
Sure.
and reseed their front lawn. You'll see less people go to the country club to golf in their spare time because they just don't have the extra money. So the turf market kind of follows the economy, so to speak. I don't see the turf market going away. I mean, not everybody's going to put artificial turf in their front yard. Not everybody's going to go to xeriscaping where it's just lava rocks and and whatever. But I think I think the future is still positive there. I think there's always a need. There's a demand. I think people enjoy grass. Our parks across the country. I mean, it's a high use. I think the demand's always going to be there, with its natural ebbs and flows. I think when it comes to the forages, I think that I think grass plays a key role there, and I don't see it going away. Sure, there's challenges along the way, both in turfs and forages. The cover crop market, so much potential there, and I think we've got some real advocates out in the Midwest who have seen the benefits and are certainly they're wonderful advocates for using things like ryegrass and crimson clovers and peas and those sorts of things as cover crops to help that Midwest crop, whether it be corn, beans, or whatever. And I think that they're seeing that. I think it's very, very good. That comes with challenges, of course. There's some challenges with making sure that I mentioned herbicide resistance before. It's making sure that we help those folks in the Midwest in that market understand how to terminate that crop. We're not sending them resistant seed. I think it's more or less, all right, let's make sure we're sending them quality seed that we know we can terminate, but then help them understand it's a different climate, different environment altogether. Chemistries work different out there. They just do. I mean,
Right.
it's so I think that's a piece I think is there, a lot of potential, but I think it's just a matter of education and outreach, and making sure that we're doing our due diligence on our end of the program, as well as helping the end user understand the right way to use things.
Well, I think that's an interesting point because when you think about cover crops, certainly cover crops have been around for centuries. But the cover crop of today, then, and the cover crop, the evolution really in the last 5, 8, 10 years is a whole lot different than it was in my granddad's days. And and to your point, I see that continuing to evolve.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that really probably wasn't much of a conversation, I'm guessing, 8 years ago amongst seed growers in Oregon, as far as cover crops making a major portion of their overall production.
Yeah, they've been at it for a number of years. I want to say that they started cover crops probably, gosh, probably 15, 20 years
Mhm,
ago.
mhm.
And I think the potential was there, and there's been a lot of push, and there still continues to be. And of course there's always pushback too. And that's okay. I mean, that's pushback is healthy. Make sure that everybody's doing the right thing. But I think from the Oregon seed production side, it's still, we're helping address that issue as best we can, and then still showing the benefits of our seed crop as a cover crop back there.
Definitely a segment that's evolving over time and probably will continue to evolve for
Oh
sure.
my, absolutely.
Well, Steve, is there anything else you want to share with us about the seed industry that, in the grass seed industry, that excites you as we take a look down the road?
We were talking about pest management and issues there. Another one that we're dealing with is that's we don't have a real good answer for is voles of all thing. I mean, stinking a rodent.
Oh,
In 2020, everything happened in
sure.
2020, right? I mean, we had everything. You name it, it probably happened, and it wasn't good. Well, 2020, we had a massive outbreak of voles in our grass crop here in the entire state, Eastern Oregon to Western Oregon, and those buggers, they hit our crop at an incredibly sensitive time where we were throwing heads, our seed heads were coming out, we're about to start flowering. In some cases we were flowering, and those voles literally clipped the tiller off at the node, dropped the whole thing to the ground, and just started line. It was like it was a logging operation by voles. It was devastating. I got pictures of fields where it looked like a pasture. There was like patches that would have a few heads kind of waving in the wind, and the rest of the field was a pasture. And so the grower at that point had 100% of his inputs other than harvest put into the crop, and he had nothing to return on
Oof.
against his costs. I mean, so voles have been a huge deal to try to figure out how we're going to control them. And as you know, in the regulatory world, I mean, we're talking about zinc phosphide. It's a vertebrate toxicant. I mean, that'll kill you and I. I mean, so it's heavily regulated, as it should be, right? Well, how do we utilize that? And then we have another issue here in the Willamette Valley, and not so much Eastern Oregon, but the Willamette Valley, the Pacific Flyway of migratory birds. We're sitting right on the freeway corridor, right? Well, when the geese started to decide to migrate, they used to migrate, they just keep going south, and they'd go all the way to California. Well, they've determined that they really like it here, and they like the climate in the Willamette Valley. So as you can imagine, right now, our skies are starting to see more and more of the goose migration has started from the north, and they're all headed south. And a lot of them will drop in, and they'll reside right here in the valley for pretty much all winter. The problem is there's a couple of species of migratory geese that are on the endangered species list or on the threatened species list, which then really puts an onus on, we cannot harm those geese. We've got to. So this, how does this relate to the vole? It relates to the vole because the only way we know how to control the vole is spreading zinc phosphide bait. Well, the geese seem to pick up those pellets too, and when they pick up a pellet, you get dead geese. So yeah, this started, oh, again, probably pushing 20 years ago or more now. The ODA regulates, with the Fish and Wildlife, regulates how we can use our zinc phosphide baits. So as of now, from now until sometime around the 1st of May, all zinc phosphide baits, if we want to use we have to put it down the hole. Like we actually walk the field and actually put it in the hole so that the goose can't access the pellet. Well, as you know, that's costly
Sure.
and it takes a lot of time. And so we get these vole population cycles that they're all cyclical. But what we've noticed over the last couple of decades is the low continues to get higher. So as it cycles down, that low part of the cycle is more and more voles. And what we're seeing in the grass seed fields is we're getting levels of voles now that it's ridiculous.
Wow.
So how do we control this? So it's it's opened up that kind of a can of worms and of all right, what kind of research do we need? We've had some amazing, very productive conversations with like the Oregon Department of Ag, the US EPA, Fish and Wildlife, trying to figure out how do we manage around the goose population, but how do we control our voles? What are some ways we can do this? What are some options? And the seed industry, I mean, through their research program, they've funded some projects actually with the USDA. But this is kind of cool with the USDA National Wildlife Research Center over in Colorado. And believe it or not, we actually trapped voles here because they're unique to us. We're so proud. We have our own little vole that causes our own huge problem, and it's I say that very tongue in cheek because it's not good. But they actually trapped voles here and they shipped them to the controlled facility at the National Wildlife Research Center to rear them there to figure out how to control them first and then come back. They're going to come back over here and apply what we're learning in research over there. And hopefully we can provide some new solutions for our growers on how to control it. It's wild. It's a heck of a story, but that's
Wow.
that's something that the growers are up against.
Wow. And obviously, the trickle down effect will eventually hit the consumer with some of those things as time evolves. But it's interesting to learn about the research that you and your team and really the industry is working on to provide these types of solutions.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing I would add, and you throw this out if you want, Bill, but is also my research program also includes looking at supplement like biostimulants and fertility and fungicides and some of these other growth regulators, a lot of these other inputs into the crop to try to produce seed more efficiently. There's a in the industry, the ag industry across the country. There's obviously I think there's a growing interest by not just the growers, but I think the suppliers as well, where we recognize as we're learning more and more about plant hormones and biostimulants and biologicals. We hear about biologicals all the time. There's a lot of potential there, and there's a lot of things that you've discovered there's not potential there.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of options and opportunity. And part of the other part that I've started since I've been able to expand my program is to start looking at all right, how can we utilize some of this stuff? Is there a body of evidence from another crop that indicates we might want to look at this? And if there is, now let's start looking at our production techniques and how do we incorporate those practices into what we do that may augment our crop and may make it better. And we're seeing some very interesting things. I mean, really interesting things. We use a lot of growth regulators here,
Hmm.
and the reason we use growth regulators is to keep our crop, well, the fescues in particular, and the annual ryegrasses and the fine fescues, and we shorten the internode length so that when it goes to flowering, that head is up here still blowing in the wind and because it's all open pollinated. So the pollen blows, we get cross pollination, and it works beautifully. If that crop is laying flat on the ground like a pancake, you'll see little puffs of pollen come up, but getting it to intermix with the other open flowers, it doesn't work real well when it's laying flat on the ground. It works really well when it's up here. So we use a lot of growth regulators to prevent that lodging so we get better seed set. Perennial ryegrass is a different animal because when we do growth regulators on perennial ryegrass, the university, OSU, did a really good work back in the late 90s where they determined that if you put on growth regulator at a certain timing of the crop, you get a biochemical response in the plant, and the plant will actually produce more florets per head, which means more seed production. So it's pretty cool. We're learning those sorts of things. And now we're looking at things like biostimulants and how do we use, auxins and cytokinins and gibberellic acids. And I mean, oh my gosh, we can go down the list of all the things that are out there.
Sure.
How do we use those to enhance our crop? And maybe there's a benefit there. Maybe it's more seed production, or maybe the crop stays healthier throughout so any abiotic stresses that come along, we can, maybe the crop can better defend itself. There's a lot of things like that the seed industry is interested in trying to figure out. Is there a play there or is there not? And then we working with the industry, the folks like Helena, for instance, is that something that they can help us with, or we're helping them with, and so forth. So that's another whole part of the program. I think it's proven to be very valuable, I think, to the grower, what we're learning there and providing that information back to the grower.
Steve, I think what you just shared there is so important for listeners to understand that research is a critical piece of production, and we've got to continue researching, whether it's in seed production that you're involved in, whether it's in product development that we're certainly involved in here at Helena. You referenced biologicals. Scott's the new sexy buzzword right now, right? But we've been in biologicals for over 25 years, and we've continued to evolve with biological products. And to your point, we're starting to see some really good things for multiple crops, and obviously seed production may be one. We're also seeing some misses too, but unless we commit to the research, we won't find those great big wins.
I can't agree with you more. And I think that a really good message to add to that is when your markets are soft. So like grass seed right now is fairly soft market. All right. We have a lot of full barns and there's not a lot of movement of seed. And that's the nature of most all ag commodities, right? It's very easy as an industry, if you're looking to cut corners, cut costs somewhere, guys will want, and I know this sounds terrible because it sounds like I'm just trying to pad my own book here, but I'm not. I truly, sincerely mean this. I think that when the things start getting soft, I think cutting research out is not a good investment because as long as that research is continually producing and is producing value, even in a down market, if you will, if we produce something during that, when you come out the other side, you're actually better off
Hmm.
than you were when you went in or while you were there because the science is there to help you to advance the crop. And I think I can't agree with you more that when it comes to crop production, pick a crop. It doesn't have to be grass seed. That's just my wheelhouse, right? But
Sure.
any crop, it's the research is going to help drive solutions to problems. It could drive how to produce a crop more efficiently, whether it's higher yield or fewer inputs. It's a positive thing and it's a must. And that's why I love the research. Ever since I left graduate school, I love doing ag research because I see that. And that's exactly the philosophy that I roll with. I'm here to help provide answers to solutions. Does that mean I'm going to hit a home run every time? No shot. But if I'm not here cranking out something and learning something, then nobody learns anything. I got some wonderful growers who sit on my advisory board and they're very supportive of that same philosophy. It's like, it doesn't matter. Even if you don't think that plot did what you wanted it to do, we still learn something out of it. And I've done a better job in my career when I do a plot and let's say the hypothesis doesn't come out the way I thought, we still learn something there. And I think that's the key is to know that no, we learned XYZ. One of my growers, he'll always say, sometimes the biggest thing we learn is from our failures. That's the biggest times when we learn something or when we fail at something. And he's so true. It is so right in that regard.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I would agree with him. Some of our greatest innovations here at the Helena Products Group have been oopses, mistakes, or we were looking for one thing but discovered another. And that's the importance of all research, whether it's seed production, chemistry production, or equipment. I mean, Mr. Ford would probably say the same thing as well. So, Steve, tell us a little bit about the research that you're involved in and how some of the funding, I guess, has come together over the past several years and really where it's going today.
Yeah, so the growers have always, through their grass seed commissions, have always reinvested their assessment dollars into several projects, but research being a big part of it. And a few years ago, when they asked me if I'd expand my program, and we worked all that out, the growers created an entity, if you will. It's called the Oregon Seed Research Institute. And their assessment dollars go into that institute to fund research conducted by the USDA and Oregon State University. We even have some research being done by Penn State University for our causes and so forth. So and the USDA outside of Oregon, like the National Wildlife Research Center. So we're looking for solid work all sorts of places that we can fund. In the last couple of years, the group has funded, I think, around $500,000 each year into seed research. That money is going to our university researchers and our USDA research scientists to get work done. They have purchased small plot harvest equipment, which is not cheap for the university and the USDA to utilize. So this grass seed industry is really going above and beyond to make sure that they're investing in research in places that need to be done. And it's the OSRI group is a wonderful group of progressive growers who are making sure that these investments with their assessment dollars are being made in the right places. And it's so far, we are a little over 3 years into it, and it's been a very good, positive program as far as we incorporate the growers, the industry, the growers and the research community to have conversations every year to talk about what the needs are, what their research capacity is, what they can do, what their expertise is, what's changed on our side, and then marry those two groups together to generate some really good research proposals that the industry can fund. Very positive relationship, very positive program moving in the right direction to support our seed industry here.
Perfect. I think that's great. That's a great plug. Steve Salisbury, I want to thank you for joining us here on this episode of FieldLink as we discover more background about the seed industry and around grass and how grass is grown in Oregon and really around the world. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, thank you.
And welcome back to FieldLink. I'm your host, Bill Smith. And now we're going to head on over to Nashville, Tennessee, where we're going to catch up with Jody Lawrence to learn a little bit more about the commodity markets. Jody, welcome back to FieldLink.
Thank you, Bill. It's good to be back. Hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving, and now in the dead sprint to Christmas is getting some shopping done and some decorations up, because it's hard to believe sitting here on the 9th that Christmas Eve is just a little over 2 weeks away.
Definitely a short period of time between the two holidays this time of year, at least for 2024. Jody, let's dive into some of these markets. We got a little bit of a rally going on with corn right now. What's happening?
Yeah, corn has been a very pleasant surprise over, over the last 3 weeks, really, because it was just kind of chopping along. And then you go back to kind of the secondary harvest low where you had all the corn either at or below $4, and everybody was worried because the yield expectation was so high from the September report. And then the October report, it got cut a little bit. And then in the November report, it got cut a little bit more. So we've had, since October 17th, we have had a 27-cent rally. And while that doesn't sound like that's the strongest we've ever seen, we've had a full 13 cents of that, nearly 14 just in the last 3 days. So corn is in a really good position, and I encourage everybody to make some catch-up sales. And we're at a perfect time of the year because you can make your sales for 24 if you've got an idea what your tax situation is going to be. You can postpone them, you can make them, and then wait on the check till January 2nd, or even go a little bit further out, because there's still some decent carry in the market. And one of the things I'm looking at now that December corn has gone into delivery and will go off the board in a couple days is you look out to March, and March is trading 441 3/4. And if you want to hold it out till April, the market, it's paying you 6 cents to store it from March to May. 3 cents a month really doesn't, it isn't too fantastic, because that's just about what normal carry is. But certainly you've got some opportunity out here to look at the futures, and wherever your basis is, I think we probably could squeeze another nickel out of this rally. And anything between this, say, 443 in March and 448, I wouldn't get greedy for that big round number of 450, because you know that all your neighbors are going to be in that same situation too. But let's just call it at 445. If you do that, you're going to be a full 35 cents better than you were in October. And that would put you 17 cents better than where we were the week after the Thanksgiving break, and Thanksgiving itself. We went down and tested that level. So it's just a good opportunity to take advantage of some strong sales from or to Mexico that's doing this, and with the kind of the general outlook of it. Ethanol has been really, really strong, the demand there, the internal industrial demand, and it's just a good spot, because the high, basically the yearly high for for March corn came on October 2nd, and that was 452. So you're going to get within 5 to 8 cents of the 2024 or post-harvest 2024 high. And I would encourage everybody to look at that. Beans, not so much, because you're going to have to sell some beans at some point. But unfortunately, the South American weather has been so good, really ideal since it started raining. The monsoon turned on, that anything you see in beans is going to give you an opportunity, and that it's not going to put futures much over $10, but the outlook there is we certainly could make the call that beans, if this crop develops where all of South America produces roughly 8.5 billion bushels of beans, that we could see a very low 9 number come March, April, before we get in the field.
Yeah, really good insight here, Jody. We're seeing this little, I guess we'll call it an early Christmas gift with this corn market, good opportunity to take advantage of some of these almost potential highs, like you mentioned, after, the 24 harvest. This looks pretty darn good. And for a lot of producers that are sitting out there with little corn, may not be a bad time to take some action there. Let's dive into this soybean thing, though. You're right. The reports coming back, South America looks really, really good with some of the production. The planting went in well. Things look good down in South America. What else are some of your contacts talking about?
Just the general nature of it. I think you've got two real challenges for the market. The first one, obviously, is the world's largest producer of soybeans, being Brazil, is going to produce over a 6 billion bushel crop just by itself. And if you look at the U.S. is coming off a big crop, not a record crop, but, a 4 billion bushel. So that gives you an idea how far Brazil is in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
And when China is buying more and more beans from Brazil, and the likelihood that President Trump, when he gets inaugurated next month, I guess we're about 5-6 weeks from that, he's already discussing trade wars and tariffs, and the main target is going to be China in that, just like it was in 2018. Now, whether the tariffs are going to be used as a negotiating tool or they're going to be more of a punishment for everything that China has done over the last 4 years to avoid what he saw as progress towards doing more business with the U.S., that's going to be an interesting thing to see January, February, March. But we're certainly in a position that you've got to be a little concerned that beans simply don't have the setup that corn does, as far as being a little bit positive. And with beans and the massive crop that could be coming out of South America, you've got to take some cover here, because you don't, and I can tell right now, everybody we talked to, we were in North Carolina last week with a bunch of meetings, and then nationally, I think University of Illinois put this out. Basically, both crops for 2025 are in the national average of losing $58 to $62 an acre as we stand right here. And while everybody goes, well, I don't want to sell it below break even, or my banker won't let me do that, with beans over $10, if they go to 9, you can throw another potentially $60 an acre loss on top of that in beans if they go down $1 and you're yielding 60 bushels an acre. So beans worry me, and we're going to find out a lot more 2 months from now what's going on with China. But right now, I think it's safe. Everybody can say it's certainly not going to be something that is going to be price positive for beans.
Well, you touched on some pretty big topics. Obviously, with the election, post-election, President-elect Trump is getting a lot of cabinet positions put in place. Boy, just a lot of really activity happening in D.C. and actually Florida with some of those announcements, as you mentioned earlier, potential tariffs. He made the big statement with Canada and Mexico having some big tariffs there of 25%, as well as China. Got some action out of those countries right away, and conversations are starting to happen.
Yeah, it was nice to see that Trump was able to get with Mexico's president and Canada's prime minister over Thanksgiving to address what he had said on the campaign trail, and then immediately after the election results were finalized, that they came to the table very quickly, which was good to see, because China is our number one corn buyer. And I think Mexico certainly understands that the illegal immigration is something that they're going to have to work on to keep their favored trade status with us. And quite honestly, Mexico and their buyers, they cannot afford, because there's really no place else they can go to buy the amount of corn they do from the U.S. They can't afford to have a 25% or a 50% tariff slapped on top of corn, because you look at, let's just say, a 25% tariff on 450, that's going to be a $4, or excuse me, $1.10 on top of that. So next thing you know, they're buying $6 corn. And they just aren't in a position as a nation and as an agricultural landscape for them to be able to afford that price increase.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for listeners to know that, well, China is certainly a huge buyer. They're having their financial woes as well. They're definitely in some tough spots as well right now.
Yeah, their economy is just in shambles, and they have had announced several different before, again, and then another one this weekend, stimulus packages, just like we saw from the U.S. Treasury during COVID in the United States. But China really shot themselves in the foot. They locked down far harder and for a much longer time during COVID, and shut down their economy pretty much, and were much slower to reopen like the rest of the Western world did once we had the vaccine and had basically had the spread of COVID under control. And they've not been able to restart their economy. It's just like, turning off a motor on a cold day, and they can't get the thing cranked back up. And whenever you could say, it's so bad now, everybody almost has to say, well, sooner or later, it's coming back, and that will be a positive. But right now, it's a definite wet blanket on any sort of rally, because they're not buying at a scale on any raw materials, and their corn imports from the United States are down roughly 80% from this time last year.
Wow. 80% in 1 year. Jody, let's talking about efficiencies. That's the chatter in DC right now. Elon Musk has been appointed into a role. Boy, bringing him in, as well as some others, to shake things up a little bit has definitely caught some headlines. How do you foresee that impacting growers?
Well, it's going to be very interesting, because if you look at what Musk and Ramaswamy are talking about, going in, cutting $1 trillion or even more. But some numbers I've seen, they even think there's $2 trillion worth of waste in the federal budget, that you have to start looking at individual departments where they are going to sharpen their axe and go in. Every Treasury appointment except Kennedy has been a staunch Trump supporter. So that they're going to toe the line and do what Trump is saying publicly, to say how they're going to run their department. And if Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, I think they're referring to it as Doge, if Elon Musk has got the loudest voice in the room, and all the other department secretaries are going to follow, if he's going to be in charge of telling them to start cutting waste, then the Farm Bill, it is going to look probably significantly different, because the first thing that they're taking aim at is direct payments in any of the departments. But obviously in the Farm Bill, there are a lot of direct payments to farmers and everybody in the industry. So that is going to be the great unknown, but I think we will find that out sooner rather than later. And by the time we get in the field in March or April, we should have a really clear picture of what they're doing and how much they're cutting inside the Department of Agriculture.
Certainly a lot of unknowns still ahead of us. But, after the cabinet gets put in place, things will start to shake out. As you mentioned, January, February, March are going to be some interesting times for sure. Jody, big news this last weekend. President Assad in Syria, he resigned, basically ousted, and he escaped and took refuge in Moscow. And that's had a little impact on the oil market. Tell us what's happening on that side.
I saw conflicting reports, and both people did that, or conflicting opinions, and both people had really good points about Syria. That one person said this very easily could calm everything in the Middle East very quickly, to a point where if you take out any risk premium, war premium, something like that in energy, that you could get back down in the low 60s, the 60 to 62, $63 a barrel, which is, $5-6 a barrel lower. And then the other one said that this, for a variety of, very obvious factors, could make it much more volatile to all of a sudden we look up and the Syrian rebels are fighting back against the Russians or whoever that case is, that, and we're back into the mid to high 70s. So two interesting directions that I'm not sure I know which one it's going to go, but down here at $67, $68 a barrel, we know that there's probably only $4 or $5 worth of downside. And anytime with oil in the Middle East, there's always seems to be a $10 to $15 upside. So if you see any more weakness and you see futures on diesel somewhere in the 205 to 212 range against the February futures, top off your tanks and start getting ready, because just like you're doing prepay and you're doing your planning for 25, never too early to make some advanced fuel purchases while the markets are down.
You bet. Maybe a slight bit of an opportunity there on that petroleum side for producers as we kind of get ready to flip that calendar to 2025. Jody, I want to thank you for joining us here on this episode of FieldLink, and appreciate your insight.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of FieldLink. To learn more about research and how it can help you improve your lawn, pasture, and forage crop, contact your Helena representative today.